Hello there, welcome to episode 39 of Knitter Matters. Thank you so much for joining us today, whether you're watching us live or the replay later. Really appreciate having you here. My name is Cheryl Lampard, I'm an image consultant. My company is Style Matters International. Throughout my life I've had the two passions of sewing and knitting. Knitting in particular is the thing that I do every day. I find it relaxing, therapeutic. It's kind of yoga for the mind, really, as far as I'm concerned. I also used to own a yarn store in Brighton, England, and one of the great joys of owning a yarn store is that you get to be able to teach people how to knit. And it's my pleasure, some 3 decades later, to be able to do the same thing now, albeit on a different platform. Do feel free to put any questions and comments in the thread below as we go along. I can't actually see the questions at the time, although if I see your name pop up, I'll give you a shout out. And I can already see that there's Linda and Kimberly and Maureen and Anne. Hi, thank you so much for joining us. Mabel's in the background. I've put some holly leaves on her today, so I hope you find that she's looking really nice and festive. So let's get on. I'm going to ask the camera to turn to the worktop and we're going to continue. Peggy, hi, thank you for joining us. Oh, it's lovely to have an audience straight off. That's wonderful. So today we're going to talk about short row techniques. It's a technique that's often used for shaping. You can shape socks with it, collars, all sorts of garments use short row knitting techniques to create shape in a way that decreases and increases can't always accommodate. Now, in episode 17, we had a really quick look at how to do some basic short row techniques, and you can see here these were the samples from there where you can see how we've certainly got some shaping going on. And Janice has just joined us, thank you so much. We've certainly got some shaping going on because this was a straight piece, but there's a lot more rows on this side than there are on this side. But these kind of clunky eyelets here, they don't create a smooth transition, whereas this one does. I've done the same thing and I've hidden those turns on the next row, and I'm going to show you a bit later how to do that. So clearly we can shape things in a way that increases don't always do. And Multi, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Multi's just joined us, thank you. So that's the basis of short row techniques, and I'm going to go into greater detail about that in a moment, because there's a lot more to short row knitting. Than just for shaping. You can add colour and texture, and Grace has just joined us. That's wonderful. Let me show you this little wedge sample. Now, at first glance, that looks like I've just knitted a triangle of garter stitch, then picked up the stitches in contrast afterwards. But I haven't. What I've done, I've turned on every row, 2 stitches from the end of the row, gone back, come again on this row, stop short another 2 stitches, and when I got to only 1 stitch left on my right hand needle, I changed the colour and knitted all the stitches this way down. So I haven't picked them up afterwards, they're already still on the needle, and I knitted in the wraps as I went along. Now you might think, well, what on earth could I use a wedge like that for? Well, it's sometimes you might, if you're making little toys, then that's a technique that you might want to use. If you're doing unusual shapes, you're trying to fill in pieces, or imagine this as a bigger piece. Imagine this on a sweater as a type of pocket. Now you'll have to kind of, imagine that, but imagine that a bigger scale. That could be almost one of those kangaroo pockets on the front of a garment. If you'd got a garment and you thought, well, I'd really wished I'd put pockets on that. We talked about how to put pockets on afterwards in a previous episode, but this would be a great way to do it. You're not having to pick up and knit anything. The stitches are already there, so you can certainly use your short rows for making pockets. This is another interesting pattern, which is all done with short row techniques. I'll show you where this came from in a second, but I think this is really quite interesting. You can actually see it sort of creates a bit of a texture there as well, sort of bumpiness. So if you like interesting textures, that's something you could do, certainly. But again, there's no increases here. If I flip this over so you can see the reverse row, you can really quite see very clearly how those rows have manifested themselves. So I've gone along, then I've just done a series of little short row techniques. And the same here. So it sort of creates a strange little bubble. I rather like the weirdness of that. This is actually from a book by the wonderful Barbara G. Walker. It's her second treasury. I gotta get that up so it's not reflecting. Second Treasury of Knitting Patterns by Barbara G. Walker. These are really useful reference books. She's done several. I have the first one and then this one, and it's a wonderful treasure. It really is a treasury of all sorts of knitting pattern techniques. This one I just found, it's actually, she doesn't really give it a name other than a short row pattern, but you can see what I've done is what she's done there on page 91 of that book. And all of the first treasury and this one, it's just completely full of really interesting techniques that you can apply to anything. She gives all the stitch counts and she tells you what you need to do that particular pattern. So it's if you do a lot of knitting and you're always looking for interesting pattern and textures, this is one to put maybe on your gift list. Right, let me move that out the way there. So that's our a colour knitting technique. Now, there's another way that you can really use short rows in a very cool technique. I've shown this pattern before. I mentioned this when we were doing some other things earlier on in the series. This is a pattern called Chine Cozy. It's by Lynn Hamps. It's not a free download. It is available on Ravelry. It's a paid pattern. I'll post the link to it afterwards. But I wanted to show you this pattern because it's just a simple garter stitch shawl, really, or a stole all the way around. But this edge, it's not picked up and stitched afterwards. It's done with the knitting. And it's a really nice edge. So I started to do that yesterday. Last evening I was sitting there just creating this edge. Bernadette, thank you for joining us. It's so great to have you. It's wonderful. So this is the basic pattern. This is the fancy bit, the frill, if you will, from the Chine Cozy pattern. Now what I did here was actually just shorten the amount of the shawl. I didn't need that to show you this, but this really shows you how short rows can work. So this is, basically a yarn over and knit two together technique, and then we cast off some stitches. But this is where the short rows happen. And you can see quite clearly how here we have our rows of garter stitch, and we've got twice as many rows here as we've gone out, come back, out, back, out, back. And Maureen has joined us. Maureen Wells, hi. Thank you for joining us. So if I flip this over, again, you can see we've got a sort of reverse stocking stitch thing going on. But again, you can see how these fan out and you can create a wonderful frill. I've done this in quite a firm yarn. And but if you did it in a sort of softer yarn, you'd obviously get a softer texture. And that led me to thinking last night as I was working on this, because I obviously hadn't done all the stitches of the shawl for the purposes of showing you how short rows can work. But as I was knitting this, I thought how interesting that would be if I did that in a finer yarn and use that almost like a lacy cuff. Can we see that? If I use that as a sort of lacy cuff. I love sleeve and cuff detail on garments. And if I did that in a finer, lighter weight yarn, I'd get a really pretty lacy effect. You could even attach that to an existing sweater if you wanted to. It would be very cool. So I think I might work on that and play with that. So, you know, again, sometimes a pattern, you can adapt it slightly and use the detail for other purposes. But I think that would be very pretty. Okay, so I wanted to show you that. So now the important thing of really how do we do these short rows? And they're honestly not that difficult. So as it's the festive season coming up, I'm going to demonstrate on the little Christmas stockings that we did a couple of weeks. Is that better on that or on the black? Let me see. Let's see what it looks like on the camera. On the black, we prefer that. Okay, that's good. I want you to be able to see it. So these were the little Christmas stockings that my mother designed many years ago. And I showed you how to do these, and I put the pattern on the page last week. So both these stockings have a short row technique. This one, let me show you. This one, I haven't hidden the wraps. I actually quite like the effect. Can we see that? You've got this kind of almost decorative holes. I actually like it on this little stocking. On this one, I have hidden the wraps. I've hidden those wraps, the wrap stitches. You may prefer that. It's entirely up to you, and I'm going to show you how to do it. While I am talking about these little Christmas stockings, and I should say this is not how you shape for a wearable sock. These are heels and toes on an actual sock, an actual garment. I'm a little bit more involved than this. But the wrap and turn principle is how short row shaping is done, and I wanted to show you this. So this morning on Facebook, oh, hi Lorraine, thank you for joining us. This morning, Maureen in the UK sent me the most wonderful photo of these little Christmas stockings made up as Christmas cards with little sort of presents tucked inside them as cards for her grandchildren. And I couldn't be more thrilled to see that. Quite made my day. And I will post Maureen's photo so that you can see just what a lovely job she's made of them for Christmas. There's nothing that's more exciting than seeing somebody recreate a design that you've done or your work. It's a real thrill. So thank you, Maureen, for sending that through today. I'm so happy that you did. So I'm going to show you now how to do the shaping on these little stockings, one without hiding the wraps and one with. So let's go first. Let me show you how to do the wraps first. You need to do that. Okay, so on this pattern we knitted up our, oops, that's, oh gosh, I've already dropped a stitch. Look at that. Oh well, these things happen. Let me put that back on the needle and let me get this the right way round. I was noodling about earlier, so that kind of fell off my needle. Okay, so I'm going to knit 8 stitches, then I'm going to wrap and make my turn. So you knit to where you want to make your first turn. So I'm going to knit to the last 2 stitches. I'm going to slip that stitch purlwise. You slip it purlwise. Then I'm going to bring my yarn forward. Then I'm going to turn my work. That's why we call it wrapping and turning. Then I'm going to slip that stitch back to that needle, and you can do that when you're the other way around as well. Now I'm going to pull back because these are short rows. I don't finish the knit row that I've been doing. And I'm going to do all the stitches along this row so you're going to see. Okay. So now we come back. And I'm going to, Janet, hi, thank you for joining us. I'm going to knit to the last, however many I think I'll get before my yarn runs out there. Okay, I'll skip one and I'll go to this one now. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing. Slip it purlwise, bring my yarn round. Okay, I'm going to slip this back to the needle, to my left needle. Doesn't matter if you do that when you've turned or on this side of the row. It's probably easier to do it when you're still on the right side so that you don't forget. Now we're going to turn, get that yarn at the back. So you can see this stitch is wrapped. When I bring that round, it's wrapped. Okay. Lots of wrapping and turning. A bit like wrapping up your Christmas presents, except you're doing some turning as well this time. Okay, so you can see here these little wraps starting to appear. And we've got Janet and Kayla have joined us. That's just wonderful. So I'm not going to do every stitch because my yarn is going to run out, but I'll stop. Instead of doing that one, I'll do this one. So I'm slipping purlwise. Doesn't matter if it's a wrong side or right side row, or I should say knit side or purl side. You're going to slip purlwise, bring the yarn forward, slip that back to the left hand needle. Now we're going to turn and grab my yarn that's got itself wrapped around the needles, so you can see quite clearly how that stitch has wrapped. Bring that forward. I'm going to purl the rest of that row. I'll do one more and then I'll show you how to, I'm going to show you how to create just the sort of, keep the little holes there if you want to. So I'll do 2 stitches here. I'm going to slip this purlwise. I'm going to bring my yarn forward. I'm going to slip this back to my left hand needle. That stitch, by the time I turn this round, is wrapped, or it certainly will be when I start the purl. So again, you can see how that stitch is wrapped. Okay. And I've done every other one just for the purposes of speed. Now, for the little stocking, it doesn't really matter, and I quite like the effect that it gave. So I'm just going to knit these stitches. I'm not going to hide them, and you can see the effect that you get. So it depends what you want. If you're happy with that, then leave it like that. So you can see we've got these little, you can see the wraps and you can see the holes. This is exactly what I did here, except I did it every stitch. I just knitted across, turned until I'd got 1 stitch left on the needle. But it's exactly what I did then. You can just see those little kind of holes. And you can see how that shaping has already started. We started off with a straight piece of knitting that's shaped that way. So then I could just continue knitting and purling for the rest of that pattern. Whoops. Okay, on this one I've already done my wraps and turns, and I have done every stitch here, so you can see the angle of that, how cute that is. Now I'm going to show you how to pick up and hide those wraps. You'd probably want to do this on a garment for sure, otherwise it would be ugly. So what we're going to do, oh sorry, I can see that you can't see me so well. Okay, this is the wrap, remember, round the knit stitch. What we're going to do is knit that together at the same time as that stitch. Okay. If you find it difficult to pick that up and knit that without putting it on the needle, you can put it on the needle, but just be careful not to twist it or lose it, as I'm about to do. Yes, don't do that. Oh, come back. There we go. There we go. Just get things. So that's why I don't really like putting it on the needle. I think it's actually easier if you can just pick that up. You can always hold it with your finger and knit it. So you're picking up the wrap and you're knitting it with the stitch that's on the needle, and that's all you're doing. And then you get a really nice seamless transition with the shaping. So that's all we're doing here. Picking up the wrap, knitting it at the same time. And this last stitch wasn't wrapped, so it's going to be the same. Let me show you how that looks on the back. So much neater in that sense than this version, but it just depends what you want to do with it. On the back, it's a little thicker there, but that's going to disappear. So let me bring back the completed ones and then I'll show you how to do it on a purl row. So this was the original pattern, and this is how I've done all my little stockings. I quite like that little step of the wraps on that, and on the back you see that quite clearly. This is where I've hidden the wraps and knitted it just as I did now to disguise those little wraps. So it's a little bit clunkier there. But honestly, by the time if this was a garment, by the time you've steamed that out or blocked it out, it's not going to show. So you do get a more seamless transition certainly for a garment, I would choose that option. But for something decorative, this is fine. Okay. And you could, of course, do that without turning at all, but then you will get a hole. Now, I want to show you how to do your wraps and turns on a purl row. And in some ways, they're a little easier. Get my yarn out the way. So, straight piece of knitting, I'm on a purl side. So I'm going to purl to the last couple of stitches again. Again, it's one of these things that at first is a bit clunky and then you get into a rhythm for it and it becomes a lot easier. So I'm coming to where I want to make my turn. So I'm going to slip my purl stitch again. You slip that purlwise, always purlwise, unless the pattern says otherwise. Okay. I'm going to take the yarn to the back. I'm wrapping it and I put this back on my left needle. And now I turn. Okay, and I bring the yarn to the back again because this is my wrong side row as far as this particular pattern is going. Let's say I'm doing reverse stocking stitch. I'm doing my short rows on my purl side. Okay, so I'll leap ahead a few. I'll stop short of maybe, oops, where have I got? That was my wrap. Okay, let's do it on this one. Again, I purl, slip it purlwise, wrap the yarn towards the back, slip that back to my left hand needle, turn my work, put the yarn to the back side, it's at the back again while I finish this row. Another row, and then I'll show you how to hide the wraps on a purl side. One more. Purlwise, I slip it to the right hand needle, I wrap it. It's always, I think it is better to bring your wrapped stitch back to the left hand needle before you turn the work. Then you know exactly where it is. So I'm turning my work. I need to get my yarn at the back. There's always the danger if you don't slip it on the row that you're working it that you're going to forget and then you'll get a hole. Okay, so I've just done 3 wraps and turns on the purl side. Now I'm going to show you how to hide these. Same principle. Exactly the same idea as with the knit rows. Oops. I've got my yarn pulling against the table. Okay. So now I've got my first wrap stitch. I hope you can see this. So I'm picking up that wrap from the back this time. Picking it up from the back. Now I can actually put that on the needle and it's not going anywhere. Purl it. Do another one, another purl stitch. I've got my next wrap. You can see how this stitch has wrapped round. So I pick that up, put it on my needle, purl both stitches at the same time. Doing it on the purl side is slightly easier because it's easier to get that stitch on the needle if you are more comfortable with knitting the stitches off the needle. Again, I pick that one up, pop it on my needle, knit them both, or purl them both together, I should say. And that is how you do short rows on a purl row. See, again, really nice seamless transition. Trying to get that to where you can see it. Okay, so that's how to do short rows, knitted, both versions, on knit rows and purl rows. Okay, I'm going to ask the camera to come back to me. That's our longer look at short rows. So I hope you found that useful, and I think once you get the hang of it, you're going to be using that a lot in your knitting. It really opens up the door for doing a lot of different knitting, including socks and more complex things. So I hope you enjoyed that. Now, as this is the season of giving, and to thank you for being just a huge part of Knitter Matters, none of this would have happened without you. We wouldn't be in week 39 without you watching, so I really appreciate that. This week we're doing a giveaway. It's a one-to-one knitting lesson with me, We can do it certainly via Zoom or any other virtual platform. You can learn a new technique, you can improve your knitting skills. If you're a complete newbie and you want to start from scratch, that's fine too. Whatever you want to learn, it's your one-to-one with me, and I'm giving away a session. So if you keep watching the Knitter Matters Facebook page, I'll publish details of how you can get that giveaway. And so keep watching the page, and we'll publish that later this week. And then starting in 2021, we will be offering knitting classes, online knitting classes, and knitting lessons as well. So that's something we'll be offering in the new year. Don't forget, if you're still purchasing knitting things, getting ready for the holidays, as I have got my knitting stash all prepared, you get 20% off of one item from Mary Maxim if you go on their website. It's the highest priced item in your cart, but you must use the promo code Cheryl when you check out. So use that code Cheryl and you'll get 20% off your item. There's some really fun, interesting things on their website this time of year, whether you're a knitter, a crocheter or a sewer, so please do take a look. As always, this episode and others are uploaded to the Knitter Matters page afterwards under videos, and they're also on our YouTube channel of the same name, Knitter Matters. So do please subscribe to that, and then you'll know when they're all available, when new ones are available. So like us, follow us, tell your friends about us. We want to reach out to knitters and help you improve your knitting skills and help you learn new techniques. So feel free as we go through the week to ask any questions, knitting related questions. As I said, I'm going to post Maureen's lovely photo of the cards that she did for her grandchildren. I'll be posting that shortly. And if you've got any photographs of your knitted work or anything, it's a knitting page. I'd love you to show me. So please do. The page is there for you to use. As always, I'm here to help, so feel free to ask questions. So until then, if I can get my mouth working, my husband would say it never stops, but that's a whole other story. Stay well, stay calm, and keep knitting. And I will see you next week. Bye for now.